Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together, we are Kenny and Renny. Yes, that Kenny and Renny. And this is the season tee up, the 2024-25 NHL season preview extravaganza. An extravaganza because we're going to have it all up running on YouTube, Facebook, and we finally seem to have got her going on Instagram here on our Kenny and Renny account on Instagram. Go follow that if you haven't followed that yet. But good to be back on Instagram because that's where it all began for Kenny and Renny. We had a nice little quaint Instagram show, Kenny and Renny. That's where it started. This is where it has got to. This is, I think, season 5 or something like that, Ken was saying. Great to be back. Great to see everybody. Great to see people in the room making comments already. Dryland Fisherman says, hey, dryland fishing is over. Here we go with KNR, the Renny and Kenny show. I like the way he's thinking already. We're going to have to rename this R and K, the R and K show instead of KNR. I got to say, KNR has a ring to it, but maybe it's just because we're used to it. I'll start saying the other one and maybe I'll get used to it and we'll flip it over. Let's see what we can do. But before we do that, I would have to run decisions like that. It's in the contract. Have to run decisions like that by our main man, Ken Wiebe. We could do that right now. Bring him into the show. I don't know what we're waiting for. Almost 2 minutes into the show. So at the 2-minute mark, let's do it. Here comes Kenny, everybody. Kenny, I believe it was Vince McMahon who said nothing can go wrong on live TV, but I was really worried up until this moment when your music cut and we popped up on screen. I was seriously worried that your head may not fit in your box because of the ego that is on this guy now. That, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't heard the news, Ken Wiebe this past weekend got his fourth, count them, fourth home run, or not home run, his fourth hole-in-one out on the golf course. This guy refuses to leave any for the rest of us. Ken, that is just an absolutely remarkable an achievement. I'd like to say I don't hate you, but part of me does because of this. But honestly, that's amazing. Great
Good to
job,
be back.
buddy. Hopefully that was that the highlight of the off season? Can we say?
I would say yes. And Sean, thank you very much. It's very odd. It was funny that last week, 3 different conversations with 3 different sets of friends brought up hole-in-ones for some reason. I don't know why. Somehow it's like they willed it into existence, I guess, Sean. That's sort of was the scene set. Was playing Minnewaska with a couple of hockey buddies, Keith Bialy and Jeremy Matashevsky. And on the weekend, as you know, it was blowing incredibly 50 to 60K winds. Tough to guess your club. Number 4 at Minnewaska is a up. It's a downhill par 3. I think it was playing about 136, but with wind, landed just short of the green and rolled up, and we were all pretty sure it was going to stop, and then all of a sudden the ball disappeared. So it was pretty ridiculous, but thank you. More hole-in-ones than home runs, no doubt about that. Anyone who played baseball with me knew I was more of a singles and doubles hitter. So thank you very much. Let's get on to the hockey, though. That's what we're here for.
Let's do it. You know what? I never thought about that before because I was a guy who could stroke a home run pretty darn good. So maybe you get the hole-in-ones. I'm the guy you bring up if it's bottom of the 9th, bases loaded, and you need some heroics. So I'll be that kind of hero because you've clearly been a hero in a direction that none of us can really follow. So you're right. Someone said earlier on in the chat room, they're here for the hot takes. Let's get right to them. Let's start with the Winnipeg Jets, where their roster ends up here after training camp. We had heard in the summer it was going to be a training camp of opportunity for the youth. The last three cuts for the Jets are three of their brightest young prospects in Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, and of course Salamonson. What do you take of how far they took it in camp, but eventually the fact, Ken, that we are returning a very similar roster to the one that we saw come out of training camp last season?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not overly surprised, and we talked about this already on the last show, the summer show. I didn't see a lot of opportunity for young players. Again, if any of those three players had gone out and blown the doors off, they could have been on the roster. And I'm also quick to say, Sean, and you know this, just because Brad Lambert is starting in the American Hockey League doesn't mean he can't be the second line center at some point. He might even be the second line center at some point this month, quite frankly. But partly, I would also say this: if and I'm not blaming Cole Perfetti because obviously he felt strongly about his contract situation, but had Cole Perfetti been there on day one of training camp, I think we would have seen a few more reps of Brad Lambert, Nikolai Ehlers, and Cole Perfetti on a line together. Because that contract took a little bit longer to get sorted out, most of the reps did belong to Vladislav Nemestikov. It was like the Jets were playing catch up a little bit on that regard. So Lambert, steady camp. Not spectacular in my personal opinion. I've seen a lot of maturity in him as a person. I see maturity in his game. If the Jets want to go on more of a 3-line of scoring and 1 line of checking, I think we could see him up here before long. But I see no issue with Brad rounding out his game a little bit more. It's not a knock on him as a player. The Jets still believe on him a lot. They think he's going to be a very impactful player. It didn't have to be right away. And I understand some people go the other way. They'd rather, give him a chance to sink or swim out of the gate, and that's fine too. I think it's fine the way they're going to do it now, and I think we're going to see plenty of Brad Lambert over the course of the year. Chibrikov, solid camp. This is almost, I would say, Sean, Lambert-esque for Chibrikov for me. Flashy early, lots of hits, lots of disruptions, getting in the face of the opponent. When the NHL rosters got stronger, I thought that Nikita Chibrikov's game kind of faded into the ether, if you will. I love the way that he plays. I love the patience and the poise he has with the puck. He needs to work on his pace before he's an NHL regular. I know there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, try him with Lowry." Nikita Chibrikov is not ready to skate at an NHL level and be an impactful player. So another year in the American Hockey League, I think, is perfect for him. I think he could get some games as a call-up, but I don't think it's a travesty that he didn't make the roster like some do. I talked to a lot of people in training camp who love the player, but I just don't think he was quite ready. In terms of Salamonson, Sean, you know my feelings on this player. I think he's going to be a very solid defenseman. Whether he's a second pair shutdown guy with Dylan Sandberg or if he is a top pairing guy with Josh Morrissey, that's up to him to decide. I've said this on various other outlets, including with Winnipeg Sports Talk with Hustler. Could Elias Salamonson play in the NHL today and be a 10 to 12 minute a game player and provide mostly steady minutes? Yeah, he probably could. I thought he had a great camp, and I think the biggest thing with Salamonson, Sean, as things got harder, he got better, and that's a sign that you don't see from young players. But at the same time, I absolutely support the Jets' decision to send him to the minors. He absolutely will benefit greatly from playing 20 minutes a game, from getting more puck touches, and from being in a kind of number 1 or number 2 role than he would being a number 6 or number 7 guy in the NHL right now. Especially for a guy who's going to play a physical game with bite, Sean. Getting the angles and the reads in the North American rink and knowing when you can jump up and pinch and lay out a big hit, and when you should maybe sit back a little bit more as a defenseman. I know you played the position. You can weigh in on this too, but I think Salamonson is knocking at the door. And the biggest thing for the Jets, Sean, if Brad Lambert and Elias Salamonson at some point during the year can fill those roles, then they don't have to send out a bunch of assets to upgrade their talent at the deadline or before that time. So I'm okay with it. And Ville Heinola obviously didn't have a chance to make the team this year out of camp because of what happened with his surgery, but I expect him to be involved. But I never really thought there would be more than one rookie on the opening day roster, and that's the case. That's the way that it ended up being. So sorry for the early buffet trip here.
Oh, no, that was great. You got a feast. That's what people are here to watch
Time
this
to eat.
guy eat. That's what the kids call it. Go eat or eat, like that's get at it. And that's what you did. Good to see that. I think the tricky part here is the expectations that were set. And I think that those expectations weren't handled probably the best way that they could be. So if we're rewinding to the summertime and the Jets, Kevin Shoveldayoff doesn't like to talk a lot about the attempts that he made and things that didn't work out. I don't think he likes to talk about or put it out into the ether, the idea that it's hard to get players to come to the Winnipeg Jets. Scott Arniel with an early shot, and I think that we've seen quite a bit of it, of one thing that I love as a journalist covering sports teams, Ken, and that is just the truth serum on full display. Scott Arniel has said time and time again that the Winnipeg Jets went out, they tried to get some players. It didn't necessarily work out, right? And so, well, what do you do next? You got to either look to trade some players. They did make a trade, but they made a trade for a prospect. And then other than that, unless they're going to find a way to trade Nick Ehlers here at some point, that seems to have quieted down. Looks like the Jets are going to try and keep him for the season. Scott Arniel said he wants to see him there for the season, says he's important to the team. The only other kind of way you can go to kind of get fans excited is to say, well, this is an opportunity for the youth on this team. And I think Kevin Shoveldayoff said that as well. Okay, because it is a bit stating a fact. Listen, if someone wants to come and be on this team that wasn't here last year, we've got youthful guys who can fight their way onto this team, right? That's kind of what he throws out there. I think that there's a chance he throws that out there and leans into it a little bit more, Ken, because at the time that he does it, Rutger McGroarty's camp is painting the Winnipeg Jets as a team that's bad with young players, doesn't give them the opportunity. And Kevin Shoveldayoff likes the idea of positioning the Winnipeg Jets as a team that have opportunity for young players to kind of fight what is being said about them around the league. Well, the problem with that is if you spell off people at that time, what happens is they come to camp with a certain amount of expectations. And I think that's a lot of what we've seen here. Jets fans were expecting change, and there's no change. This is Groundhog Day Bill Murray lack of change on this team, other than the fact that your fifth and sixth defensemen are the only thing that has changed on this team, the only place that there is change. So I think that what happened is this is a little bit of the Jets kind of solving one problem in the summertime, kicking the can down the road by saying, okay, you think we're bad with youth? Well, we didn't go out and add people because we're going to give young people a chance in camp. And then when those young players don't make it onto the roster, people get frustrated. And I understand them getting frustrated because it sounded like there was going to be change. That's not the way it worked. I would say this, so that's all the noise around this. The nuts and bolts of icing the very best hockey team, I think, are managed in a way where Brad Lambert is not in a place right now where he's a better second line center for this team than Vladislav Nemesnikov. We saw Ken, he got pushed around in games. It was people said it over and over again, those early Scheifele days when he kind of had the Bambi legs. Brad Lambert had that in practice. He was getting tossed around by the likes of Adam Lowry and a lot of the other bigger players. I don't think he's there yet physically, but his shot's there. His IQ is there. His speed is there. He's not far off. I think if he goes down, just gets a little bit stronger and plays minutes, which I think is the important thing, is what is going to work out well for the Winnipeg Jets. Same thing with Salamonson. You want these guys to log stupid minutes, play lots of hockey. It's good for development. Scott Arniel said it himself. He didn't want to keep these guys and lose them. And that's one thing that, and listen, I'm not saying people are wrong here. I like this comment by Julien Labossiere, who says Lambert would be better served in a third scoring role with the Jets in this very late October for the Moose. Give him the month and reassess in November if I was in charge. And I'm telling you right now, the Jets could try this and it could work out. And Julien could be 100% right here. Scott Arniel is a guy who has to live with the consequences of that decision. He said out loud, he's concerned about the idea of bringing up a player, losing them, losing some confidence, and having them take a step back and actually creating a longer path to the NHL. the one thing about this, like it or not, the Winnipeg Jets are in a position where they had a team, almost the exact same team they have right now, that started out was one of the best teams throughout the majority of the season, ended up fourth place, logged a good chunk of those points before the likes of Tyler Toffoli and Sean Monahan showed up. So this is the roster that was one of the best in the NHL last year. And not only are you in a position where if you're in a win now team, you got to beat guys out of a spot to get into that spot, but you're also in a position where if you feel like you've got a roster that can compete, there's no need to rush prospects and risk losing them on the way to the NHL. I don't think it's ever a bad thing. Well, sorry, when you start getting into a certain age, you gotta make room for players at some point. I don't think those players are there yet. I think they're served extremely well by going and being studs down in the AHL with the Manitoba Moose. I'm not putting the idea out of my head that Brad Lambert doesn't return to the Winnipeg Jets at some point this season and maybe stick with them. I think it's the right move to start them where they are in the AHL right now, though.
Yeah, and just a quick one for Julian. I mean, the Jets did try this under Paul Maurice with Nick Petan. A couple of years ago, he was on the fourth line, which, again, you have to remember, it's easy to say third scoring line, but the reality is that with the way the Adam Lowry line is used, Sean, it's fourth line minutes. So Nick Petan was getting, 8 to 11 minutes in the game. He was getting second power play puck touches, but it just didn't go well in the fall, and he got sent back down to the American League. And again, I'm not saying this would automatically happen for Brad Lambert, and I'm not totally opposed to it either, but I'm saying that there is recent evidence that it doesn't necessarily work with all players, with skilled players. But again, I love Lambert's game. I expect him to be up here before long. Again, I'm not saying this is a Kyle Connor situation where it's 4 games and he's back up and, in a regular forever, but it's far more important for specifically Lambert and Solomonson and eventually Chibrikov. When they come back, you want them to come back and never go back to the American Hockey League. That's the intent here. And just a quick one about Rutger McGroarty, Sean. I spoke to a couple guys around Pittsburgh who've been following the Penguins, and one of the reasons Rutger had a steady camp, no doubt about it, but one of the reasons he made the team is because of injuries, and there's no guarantee that Rutger's going to even be here on October 20th when the Penguins are in town. If he is here, good for him. But this whole thing, Rutger was right. He's getting to start in the NHL. I mean, let's see if he makes it through the first month in the NHL before we start making declarations that Rutger was right about opportunity. Because if Brian Rust was playing, there's no guarantee that Rutger would be in the lineup because the Penguins don't want him to be a fourth line player either. Coming out of his freshman year at the sophomore year at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, just a quick one here on an Infinity comment who says, Sean, he wouldn't play 2C minutes, though. Shelter him with play drivers and see what he's got. I think that this is a great strategy if you're bringing Brad Lambert up towards the end of the year and you're trying to use him to make your team better for a push. I think right now, though, the idea of not playing him 2C minutes means you're starting to play him third, fourth line minutes. The Jets have a third line that they've shown once again they're going to go heavy with this year, which means let's be honest with ourselves, if he's not playing 2C minutes, he's playing fourth line minutes. And if he's playing fourth line minutes, you have to ask yourself, even if you bring him up, even if you shelter him with play drivers and see what he's got, if what you're seeing of him is him on the fourth line at the NHL level, is he really getting better the way he would be playing 1C minutes, number one power play minutes, all those things in the AHL? So Infinity comment, I love this idea for what I think is a very real possibility this year, that at some point Brad Lambert comes up because he makes the Jets a better team heading towards the playoffs. I just don't think that the time is now for that. That's my opinion. I got to say, I'm a youth movement guy. I love the idea and I love the hunger that Winnipeg Jets fans have in trying to get these players to the next level. Because what I look at when I see Chibrikov and Lambert and Salamonson is guys that you and I can better get to know, because we're going to be talking to them for a lot of years, and I better start gathering some stories, because I'm going to be telling stories about them on Hockey Night in Canada for years to come. But I think that the path there lies in getting reps and reps and reps and reps at the AHL level, rather than getting, saying, hey, maybe I belong in the NHL, but at a fourth line level. And I do want to say this. Oh, go on.
Just one quick one on that front, Sean. I mean, we think of 2018 because it's the deepest run the Jets ever had. After the Jets got Paul Stastny in 2018, their fourth line was a combination of Brian Little with Matthew Perreault on the left and either Yoel Armia or Jack Roslovic on the right. So I think that could easily be Brad Lambert, either playing the role of Little or, Roslovic in that scenario where he does become more of a regular down the stretch because he benefits from additional puck touches. And I also understand why fans are saying, yes, it's a light schedule for the Moose. That's true. But it's also, if Brad Lambert's not in the lineup every night, or if he's only playing 10 minutes, I mean, there's benefits to him being around the NHL team, but because he's only going to get, really better and know if he can make the adjustment and the jump if he's playing against NHL players. I get that theory also. But puck touches at that age and at his stage of development, I think, are far more important. And again, ultimately, Brad Lambert will determine how long that he's down or when he gets up, because the Jets really believe in the strides he's making. He did a great job of adding the 8 or 9 pounds of muscle in the offseason. You could tell he's a more conscientious defensive player. And I'm totally okay with the fact that he wasn't trying to go end-to-end and 1-on-4 and turning pucks over and trying to make things happen with flash and dash. I liked his game. It was steady. I didn't necessarily see the evidence that he outplayed Vladislav Nemestikov to win that job. And Sean, the other part of this, if this was 3 years ago when the Jets were playing their fourth line 6 to 8 minutes, we'd be having a much different conversation. The Jets have all 3 guys who were regulars on the fourth line last year, when Nemestikov was on it. They're double-digit goal scorers. These aren't just guys that are scoring 3 or 4 goals a game and treading water. Now, again, some folks are going to ask about Rasmus Kupari / David Gustafsson. Hey, can one of those guys become a double-digit goal scorer? We'll see. And I understand, Brad Lambert could he's probably a much quicker candidate to be a double-digit guy, but limited minutes are not what Brad Lambert needs, and that's why he's going to start in the American Hockey League.
Just wanted to bring up that comment that I had brought up right before this. This is a really important point. Chase Charney says, I'm sorry, but I find it very hard to get excited for a season where the biggest on-ice addition is Hayden Fleury. TNSE can look in the mirror the next time they wonder about an empty barn. I do think this is the other part of that. I think when Kevin Cheveldayoff tipped his hat to a youth movement and had this conversation, the people were expecting a payoff. There are some people who are going to be excited about the youth. That's just the way it goes, and show up to games to see that. And that's not happening now. So that's another reason why I do really think that comment was made to spell off, well, it's not so bad. Yeah, we tried to get some players. Yeah, it didn't work out. We can just fill from within because we really like our young players. And when you say that, it spells off the idea, the attack that, which is the way I saw it, by Rutger McGroarty's camp on the Winnipeg Jets and how they treat their young players. I think at the time that's a 2 birds with 1 stone situation for the Jets, but it's a kicking the can down the road situation when you don't add the youth. You opened yourself up to criticism from the fans who wanted to see the youth come. Chase Charney wanting to be the kind of person who goes to a game to buy tickets to see Brad Lambert at the NHL level and see him breaking things open. That's one of the things you have to consider when you are an organization like True North Sports and Entertainment. So I get it. I get that this is something that, just in spite of the fact that I think the Jets made the right moves in the way they did this, in sending those players there. I just don't think they're at that stage yet, despite the fact I think that the salesman in me says, boy, oh boy, there's a lot of people out there who would have wanted to see Brad Lambert or Chibrikov do their thing, or Salamonson. And I totally get that. And I think that those are justified feelings. And it's just one of the dangers of saying what Kevin Cheveldayoff did when he said that in the summertime.
And just wrapping up, putting a bow on that, Braden Yager had an awesome camp. this is not a 5 years down the road youth movement, Sean. There are 8 unrestricted free agents on the Jets roster, and I'm pretty confident in saying not all of them will be back next year. The youth movement is not far afoot.
No,
For me.
no.
Yager is going to be an excellent NHL player. He probably, I would say this, Sean, we talk about Brad Lambert's speed and offensive gifts. Braden Yager has lots of offensive gifts, but his defensive game is probably already at an NHL level. So he's a guy that's also going to be knocking on the door. And for folks who haven't necessarily been watching OHL highlights, Kevin He, who had an excellent camp, Sean, and is the type of player the Jets, they're looking for. This is a feisty guy who has incredible speed. He's off to an incredible start in the Ontario Hockey League with the Niagara Ice Dogs. So I would say this team is going to look decidedly different next year. It's not going to be 6 rookies or anything coming in, but there are rookies that are going to make it impossible for the Jets to not have some younger, exciting players on the roster. I just think that there are capable NHL veterans that won their jobs, quite frankly. And I think Hayden Fleury is one of those guys. I understand that he's not a high ticket seller. This is a guy who's a high first round pick, and things haven't gone as smoothly for him. He's on his 5th organization. But quite frankly, Sean, Hayden Fleury had a steady training camp as well, and he won the job in my personal opinion. So is he going to keep the job? That's up to him. But this is a guy who, and I've said this before, we talk about familiarity with coaches. Dean Chenoweth is running the defense this year, Sean. Hayden Fleury played his best hockey of his career when Dean Chenoweth ran the defense of the Carolina Hurricanes, who they are one of the best defensive cores in the National Hockey League still, even with some departures. So can Fleury get back to being that player? That's up to him. If he can't, there's going to be opportunity for other people, whether that's Ville Heinola when he's healthy, Logan Stanley, or eventually Elias Solomonson.
All right. I forgot how you and I can just deep dive on just one little topic that was only supposed to take us 10 minutes. We're going to get to another one here. A former colleague of mine at CBC, Justin Dealey, with a great comment. He says, I get the lineup decisions, but this is essentially the same group that folded in the playoffs 2 years in a row. We're going to get to that comment because we are going to get to basically where we think the Jets are going this year, what kind of optimism you should have in regular season success, what kind of optimism you think you should have in playoff success. Before we get to that, though, we just want to say thank you. Thank you to every single last one of you out there who listened to KNR, because one of the things that we need to make this work is we need our sponsors. And in order to keep our sponsors or show our sponsors that we are worthy of being sponsored by them, you as our audience need to go out and show our sponsors that there's value in them being with us. You have done that. You have done that in spades, because I'm beyond proud to say that the 7 sponsors that we had from last season have all re-upped with KNR again. That's good news for us. It's good news for you, because it means Frankie and the boys at Vittorio Rossi, they're ready and willing, and you're going to head on down there, and you want to get looking like some of the sweet fits that KNR are showing throughout the year. Frankie and the boys are still the place for KNR listeners to head to and to look like $1 million. Gotta say, of those 7, some coming back for their 2nd year, most for their 3rd, a few coming back for their 4th. One of those would be Cambrian Credit Union that is back. We've stayed pretty true to Cambrian Credit Union. Like I said, my daughter's now 14 and 13 years old. I'm starting to see the money flow out of the house a little bit more, Ken. And it's a good thing they have their unfee accounts over at Cambrian Credit Union, because shopping has become quite an addiction of theirs. And the Cambrian Credit Union unfee account makes sure I don't pay and they don't pay other fees. And it just means more Sephora and clothing and hoodies and all the kind of things that young kids do. I want you to give Sweet Lou a shout out, because Sweet Lou, hey, keep the Sweet Louisms coming, folks, because Sweet Lou is back into the fold. Ken, of course, had an experience with him a long time ago, and he's been sticking with him ever since.
Yeah, Lou Furlan found both of our condos, and they're both ended up being fabulous homes. If you're looking for realty needs that need to be met, contact Lou Furlan at Rolla Page Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@loufurlan.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Furlan, former Manitoba Bison. Spoke with him earlier this afternoon. Sean, he's quite excited by Brian Dobie's crew. They're off to a great start
Yeah.
in the football activities in Canada West. So they'll be continuing to roll, and he's excited about the Bomber season, and he said he can't wait for the Jets season. So Lou Furlan, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of this community, including our podcast.
I'm not sure if he's a KNR listener. I know he listens to WST. Michael Wynn. He's got a son. His wife Beverly sings sometimes the anthem
Zach, yeah,
at the games, and Zach, his son, plays for the Bisons. And he's Mike is one of those infectious fans, right? Who just makes Winnipeg sports, like fans like that elevate it for everybody. And you can see how excited he is about his son playing with the Bisons. That's great to see things going so well for them. Johnston Group, the Kenny and Renny OGs back again. That means we're going to have the Got You Covered play of the game going every single time. Really want to thank the Johnston Group, who I just really think can one of those organizations we're super proud to be associated with, just because of how they represent not just KNR themselves, the city of Winnipeg, national company like that. We're really, really lucky to have them on board. As are all of you lucky that the keg is still on board, because that means we're going to keep churning out the $50 gift certificates per show. TCB back on board, going to keep giving away the 8 packs of Frosty Delicious Lamplighter show after show. No live events this year other than the KNR year ender will still be happening. So if you really need to get together with Kenny and Renny, that will be your one opportunity to do so. We've sold that building out 2 years in a row. Want to make it 3 because we think that's the preeminent sports media party here in the city of Winnipeg every year. That said, if anyone just wants to message me and get together and go down, if we want to get a group of KNR folks and head out and go on down to TCB and have a couple here or there, or do the same thing at the keg, feel free to reach out. We'd love to do that. I want to, before we get to one last one from the returnees from last year, Pristine Roofing. I wanted to share this because I had said I had a story. I teased this. Pristine Roofing, we are very happy to announce that you remember their Pay It Forward program. Well, KNR listener, Paolo Provenza, ended up being the winner of that program. And here's the story. Paolo nominated his sisters Rosa and Rosario for the contest. Paolo, Rosa, and Rosario, they just lost their parents, and the state of their parents' roof was really, really bad. And Rosa and Rosario didn't have the means with which to fix it. So here's the deal. Paolo nominated them, but this is the part I love. He was upfront in saying that if he didn't win the Pay It Forward program, he was going to take out a loan of his own money, and he was going to do the roof himself. And in the end, this is what that Pay It Forward program was all about. It was designed to help not only those who really need the help, but those who deserve that help. And people like Paolo who go above and beyond for others, his sisters in this case. And that made Paolo an easy decision for the ownership at Pristine. That would be Don Fata and Ash Boyd. Some of you may remember Don from the KNR year ender last year, walking around with the Pristine jacket. Some of you asked him if he was North End Rick. It drives him crazy. So if you see Don out, please keep asking him if he's North End Rick. I know he loves that. But, Don and Ash and North End Rick are beyond excited to award this roof to Paolo and his sisters. And everyone at Pristine was really thrilled. The workers who were involved with doing that roof, which came out to just under $10,000 worth of work and materials for the job. They were so happy they were able to remove what was a significant level of stress for a very worthy family and provide them with that roofing system. And because it was such a rewarding experience, guess what, folks? Pristine is going to do it all over again. The Pay It Forward program will return next year. And I just love this. This is a note from Don and Ash and North End Rick, your favorite guy there, your favorite guy to give the wake-up call. They want to thank you, the KNR listeners, because they were trying to get the word out about the Pay It Forward program, and it really took fire when the KNR audience took a hold of it and sent it out. So they wanted to thank you, and I want to say for myself and Ken, it's just so rewarding to be associated with a business like Pristine Roofing. I love the Pay It Forward contest. I love the ideology behind it. I love what Pristine brings out in their customer base, and I love what this has brought out in our audience. It's just really great for us, Ken and I, to be in business with them. So thanks, Pristine, and welcome back. And to everyone out there, start thinking about someone you know who would be deserving of next year's Pay It Forward winner. That's the returnees. I'm also very proud to announce that we are bringing on board Arctic Spas, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you've heard about this. Renny got himself a little oasis in the backyard this past year, got myself an Arctic Spas. They jumped on board. I love this story. As I was talking with Dustin, who took really great care of me, we were talking about him advertising on the podcast. And as we were chatting, a KNR listener walked over and said, "Hey, how do I get the KNR deal?" Love you guys. You're the best at that kind of stuff. One of the reasons that they're on board, but they're on board because quite simply when it comes to our weather and living in Manitoba and in Canada, they are simply the best option when it comes to a hot tub choice. They've got the Spa Boy system going on in there, which I can just tell you this. I've got a backyard pool. It's like basically a frog pond. It is green, it is gnarly, and yet my hot tub is perfectly pristine, and it's because of this Spa Boy. My phone gets updates, all these different kind of things. If there's ever any kind of problems, it's just absolutely taken care of. It is idiot proof, and I am absolute proof of that. And I just want to say here, I'm going to go back to this. Someone says, "Boo, where's the flow? Cut my hair. The flow is over. Work with Vince," says. T-Will gets a dig in, says, "Renny, where's the flow? Hashtag disappointed." I know a lot of you thought that Renny had cut his hair because Elliot Friedman twice on the 32 Thoughts podcast bullied me about it. That's not the case.
And on our show.
Exactly. The case is I am trying to become the next male model for the Spa Boy for Arctic Spas. And I think I'm off to a good start here. That blue, the blue eye band there looks almost like a headband. Maybe I can convince them to change it when I win the contest, become the new Manitoba Spa Boy. Okay, moving on here, Ken. Let's get, just finally to say, really appreciate Arctic Spas coming on board. Like same deal as everyone else, folks. If you're looking for a spa, head on down there, give them a talk, and whatever you do, let them know Kenny and Renny sent you. Ken, let's just get into expectations that we have for this team. A lot of people here saying nothing's changed, and that could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. Where do you see it right now with the Jets returning almost exactly the same roster they had last season?
Yeah, Sean, I mean, one of the things, obviously a lot of the things went well for the Jets last year, and being gave up the fewest goals in the NHL, won the Jennings Trophy, had 110 points. They were mostly healthy. They got 82 games from Nikolai Ehlers. That's a lot of games for a guy who's, unfortunately for Nick, has had some injury difficulty over the course of, some seasons. It was great for him to play in all 82 and be an Iron Man. They were a team that got career years from certain players. There's no doubt about that. Nobody's, disputing that. But what they weren't good at, they had a Vezina Trophy winner, second-time winner, fourth-time nominee. They had the best backup goalie in the NHL last year, Sean. Ken Capo Kakinen or Eric Comrie provide the same level of goaltending as Laurent Brossoit. I mean, that's the other difference with the team this year. They're going to need Kakinen to either be the latest goalie to flourish under Wade Flaherty, or have Comrie revert to the stats that he posted in the year before he signed the 2-year deal with the Buffalo Sabres, when he was a .920 goalie with the very low twos goals against average. So we'll see if that's the case. The one thing, Sean, we know they weren't good at was special teams. Last year, the power play and the penalty kill were both in the bottom third. I would say that they're going to, I'll be very surprised if they're not at least middle of the pack, and if they're maybe even, inching their way into the top third at some point under Davis Payne and Dean Chenoweth. Nikolai Ehlers being a big part of that. We saw him score a very nice goal in that pop position, as Davis Payne likes to call it, in the high slot. I expect him to be excellent there. If Gabriel Velarde can stay healthy, I've said this on numerous occasions, this is a guy that could be a 40-plus goal scorer. Kyle Connor is a guy who can compete for the Rocket Richard Trophy. Mark Scheifele can get back to being a point-a-game player, and I think a big one, too, for me. I think Velarde could be a 40-plus goal guy, Sean, and there's no disputing that for me. And I also think Josh Morrissey, this is the year that Josh is a finalist for the Norris Trophy. I picked him as my winner in our Dump and Chase season preview in the Free Press on Saturday. With all of that in mind, and the biggest thing for me, Sean, the reason why I think the Jets remain a playoff team. Now, again, are they going to be in the top 3 in the Central or one of the wildcard teams? I'm not certain. I have picked them to finish 3rd in the Central. Could they slip to a wildcard position? Of course they could. It's possible. There's a lot of great teams in the Central Division. I expect there to be 5 teams from the Central in the playoffs. The Jets will be one of them. I think that their improvements on special teams with a healthy Gabe Velarde, and the biggest thing for me, Sean, why I think the Jets can still be a contender. I'm not sure they're going to be in the Western Conference Final or the Stanley Cup, but I think they could win a round or 2 this year. The biggest reason for that is their commitment to team defense. They know what they're supposed to look like. And as Adam Lowry told me earlier this week, when they commit to playing team defense the way that they had last year for the majority of the year and the year previous before things sort of spiraled out of control, the results have followed. It's simple. I mean, when the Jets look the way they're supposed to, they've had success. Now, that hasn't translated into playoff success. That no one is disputing that. That's an absolute fact, and the Jets are not okay with it. They want that to change, but I see them as being a strong regular season team, and I think that they're going to be better when it counts this year, but now it's up to them to eliminate 8 other teams to get there. How about you?
Okay. This is the comment that I made before I asked you that question. Not adding can be seen as a bad thing, could be seen as a good thing. I've taken a look around the majority of the league, and if you take a look at where the Jets were in the regular season, we're talking about an upper echelon team. And yes, they lost a number of players, and I do think that the Brendan Dillon loss is a really big loss. I think that the Sean Monahan loss is a really big loss. But for the most part, other than Brendan Dillon and Nate Schmidt, who is in and out of the lineup being gone, this is the exact same team as they had last year that really did well at the beginning of the preseason, was pushing itself to the top of the NHL standings for a good chunk of that time before Christmas. So we know that this is a capable team. Question that I have when it comes to their capabilities is Rick Bowness talked about this last season with the Winnipeg Jets. It's hard to play the style of game that the Winnipeg Jets play. The Dallas Stars played that Rick Bowness hockey, and they tired of it. And they moved on because of it. A team that was having playoff success with that coach moved on from Rick Bowness because those players tired of that. Why? Because it's hard. Why? Because there's a lot of players who think, well, let's take the brakes off defensively and make it a little bit more fun, add more offense. And yeah, we're going to allow more goals, but we're going to score more goals, and we're still going to try and stay on the same side of the balance. One way or the other, you need to be an extremely mentally strong team to play that brand of hockey over and over and over again. The Jets played it 2 years ago. They got to Christmas time and they started to slide. They did it last year again, got a little bit deeper in the season, but again started to slide. I wonder how long you can keep going to a team and asking them to shut teams down and be so solely committed to defense the way that they have done so with the Winnipeg Jets, where we've seen the Jets slide on it in the past, right? Now, I think from what we've seen from training camp, the Jets are going to start the season and pick up right where they left off last year in the regular season, in their ability to shut teams down. I don't necessarily know what the season is going to look like as far as when they start to slide, how long it's going to be. Maybe it happens earlier in the season this time around. I don't know the kind of mental warfare that happens in a team's head when you have to grind and grind and grind. And what happens when you don't feel like grinding anymore? That's the question for me. Now, unlike the Dallas Stars, I don't think the Jets necessarily have the horses offensively to outscore their problems when they do decide not to grind. So maybe the Jets just go through this and realize if we're not defending, we don't stand a chance the way this team is constructed. That's just the way it goes. But the Jets are going to be very dependent on playing that system all over again. And that to me is something, again, I feel like they can do it. I feel like they've been doing it in the regular season. But to go further, okay? So we're talking about, finishing fourth in the league again. I think everyone would take that. But for the expectation that the Jets are going to somehow get beyond, and you've talked about it, you see them maybe going deeper in the playoffs than they did this past year. I think if you want that to happen, you have to start with the idea that the Jets can be that super defensive team all over again and that they won't have a tail off. I think a tail off on that defensive game is a risk. You have to think that it's a risk that the Jets aren't going to be able to do that or are going to have similar drop-offs like they had at the tail end of both of the last seasons. So you have to assume that that's not going to happen if this team is going to go beyond that they're going to be able to do that in the playoffs. But there's a lot of other things you have to assume too. You have to assume that Cole Perfetti is going to find his legs and take the next step. You have to assume that Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck are going to awaken in the playoffs in a way other than 2018 for Mark Scheifele. They really haven't been able to do before. Or Nick Ehlers take the next step in the playoffs. Or Kyle Connor take the next step in the playoffs. You have to assume that these players that we're talking about, or Ville Heinola is going to come in and he's going to be able to spell this team off while losing a player I think was vastly important for this team. And here's the rub in all of this. It is a massive, massive ask of Scott Arniel to do this, because what you are asking him to do is to get more out of players like Mark Scheifele, more out of Connor Hellebuck in the playoffs, more out of some of these other players that I just mentioned in the playoffs than one of the winningest coaches in NHL history who just won a Stanley Cup in Paul Maurice, or more than you just got out of the longest tenured NHL coach in NHL history in Rick Bowness. That is the task in front of Scott Arniel, is to find a way to get more compete out of players than two of the most historic coaches in NHL history. It is a massive ask. And I think as long as you have the roster that you have, the best case scenario is maybe that you go to the second round, possibly the third round. But I think those are huge, huge asks. I think that this roster showed us what they are capable of in the playoffs last year. I think they showed us their foibles. I think they showed us their faults in the playoffs last year. The idea that the Jets are just going to mentally overcome that and find a level that they've never had before, and that Scott Arniel is going to find that when Rick Bowness couldn't and Paul Maurice couldn't, that you are just basically asking for the perfect storm of things to fall into place. This is a long way of me saying I think the Jets are still going to be a good regular season team. I'm waffling on them being a 7th or 8th seed as opposed to I think that they're going to get passed by the Nashville Predators. I still think the Dallas Stars are the cream of the crop. I think the Edmonton Oilers are the cream of the crop in the Pacific. The question for me is, how far is Colorado going to fall? There's still questions of if Nichushkin can make it back at some point, questions if Gabriel Landeskog will return. If those players do, it's a different team. I take a look at their roster other than that, and I expect a drop off from them. So maybe they stay below there and the Jets stay in third place, but they haven't shown me without making significant adds towards the playoffs that they're a team that can get out of the first round of the playoffs. And even if they do that, to me, it looks like a team that is once again going to have to sacrifice maybe a first round draft pick, a couple second round draft picks, whatever it takes to add the kind of assets they will need to make that push come the playoffs. That to me is not a winning strategy, constantly bargaining your future for your present in a present that does not look to me the same way as the present of a team like the Dallas Stars or like the Edmonton Oilers in the West, teams that are there and ready to go for it. Hey, if you're bargaining the future and you've got the Edmonton Oilers where you are, that's a good bet. If you keep bargaining the future for the Winnipeg Jets, I'm not sure this roster has shown you that it is worthy of bargaining the future for.
Yeah, I mean, those are fair points, but I mean, we know that Kevin Cheveldayoff believes in the core. He's continually re-upped players in the core, and that includes Scheifele and Hellebuck starting their contracts. And you touched on it, Sean. I mean, the Jets need Connor Hellebuck to take another step in the postseason. I mean, that's the case. I mean, same with Mark Scheifele. If he wants to be on Team Canada at the Four Nations, he's going to have to elevate like he did in 2018. I mean, those are also facts. So again, the biggest problem for the Jets is that the Central's hard. I mean, and as far as the Oilers go, Sean, I agree with you. I think that they are going to go in as the Western Conference favorite. But there's a lot of people that are still surprised that they actually beat the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final. And I think the Dallas Stars are better than they were last year, despite losing Joe Pavelski and obviously Chris Tanev leaving in free agency. The Edmonton Oilers have a ton of urgency, Sean, and they can't afford to get off to the slow start like they did last year that cost Jay Woodcroft his job. With Leon Draisaitl's contract extension kicking in next year, we already know how hard it was for them to have a bunch of $1 million players with having two of the best players in the league. We know Evan Bouchard's going to need a new deal. Connor McDavid's going to need a new deal. So, I mean, I'm not saying their window is closing. It's always going to be open with those guys on the roster, but it's going to be getting difficult for them as we move forward here. So anyways, the Jets are in a tough spot. There's no doubt it's not going to be easy for them, but I don't think they want it to be easy. I think they're sick and tired of being the team that's flamed out early on. And we've heard some frustration from various players early on in training camp, and I think that it's going to be a driving force for them. Morgan Barron told me early in camp too, Sean, it's not good enough just to be in the playoffs. So the only way you change the narrative is by changing the result. So to me, internal motivation is an important thing. And a lot of these teams that we're talking about, just quickly, and I'll pass it over right away. A lot of people saw the Florida Panthers as not being able to get the job done. A lot of people saw the Colorado Avalanche before 22 as being playoff chokers. And the way that they changed the narrative was by winning. And that's the only way that they can change the narrative.
Okay, I just want to ask you this, though. What would be different this year than years past as far as it comes to the Winnipeg Jets and them having this motivation of being like, hey, let's not be those guys who are capable and then flame out when it's most important. I get your relation to the Florida Panthers, but the Florida Panthers are a team that last year, before they won the Cup, went to the Cup final. The year before that were the President's Trophy winners. Like you're talking about, we're seeing advancement of this team. The year before that were a really good team that made a really strong push of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Like there's clear progression from that team. The Winnipeg Jets are a team that in 2018 are probably the best team in the league, and they find a way not to win it. 2019, still the best team in the league and kind of flame out there, lose their defense. But this is a team that year after year seems to, outside of that Canadian series where they beat the Edmonton Oilers. And again, this is a series that they win 4 straight, but the analytics and all the overtime goals tell us it's a series that could have gone a very different way. The Winnipeg Jets, like the lesson you're talking about them saying, hey, why don't we find a way to get over the top in the playoffs? If you're talking about the Florida Panthers, their path to the Stanley Cup and to playoff success was grinding their way through various achievements and achieving more and achieving more and achieving more. Why, I guess the question for me, are the Winnipeg Jets different this year when they're coming off pretty much the same outcome that they came off the year prior to that? They missed the playoffs the year before that, but the year prior to that and the year prior to that.
No problem. I'm happy to answer it. And Sean, the Jets were 8th wildcard team, barely got in. Yes, they were good early, but they weren't as committed. When they abandoned their defensive zone commitment, they almost missed the playoffs in epic proportions. So
hey, hold on. But they were
4th in the NHL last year.
Right, but shouldn't they have learned that lesson that year, not to take the foot off the brakes when they were the best team in the West and then let it all fall apart in epic fashion. Shouldn't that have been the impetus that had them
Sure.
not flame out in the same way in the playoffs last year?
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I mean, it took a Stanley Cup champion to knock them out, Sean. So what I'm saying is, if the Jets were not going to learn their lesson, they wouldn't have been fourth in the NHL last year. And yes, that got them absolutely one playoff win, and which is nothing. I understand that, but where you're talking about the Panthers, when they were President's Trophy winning team, they didn't care about defense. So that's what changed with them. And then 2 years later, they won the cup. So the Jets 2 years ago didn't care about defense. Now it's about doing the hard things defensively when it matters, which is in the playoffs. They haven't done that since 2018, and it's up to them to show that they can do it. So I'm not saying it's an automatic. But the other thing too, Sean, I know it was a 5-game win and a gentleman's sweep by Colorado. If the Jets had any success at all on special teams, that series could have easily gone deeper. And again, that's easy to say. I understand that. I'm not making excuses for them because they got beat by a better team. But I mean, what we saw last year was that the Avalanche made the necessary adjustments, and the Jets kind of didn't dare bear down on doing the hard things that it took to stay with the Avalanche, and that's why they went home early. Again, there's no guarantee, and like you said, there's evidence from 2019 on that there should have been lessons learned. I'm not disputing that. That's an absolute fact, and you're right about it. But that doesn't mean you can't learn later on in life. I mean, there's lots of players in their early 30s that figure it out after a lot of heartache, and the Avalanche had lots of heartache before they finally broke through. They couldn't get out of the second round, and a lot of people were saying they can't do it, and then they did it. So again, I'm not saying the Jets are the Avalanche or the Jets are the Panthers, but we're going to use the Panthers as an example because of the obvious reasons. They went from being a run and gun team to being a team last year, Sean. Simple. They gave up the same number of goals or one more than the Jets did last year. Their structure was based on team defense. Yes, they have a little bit more high-end or high-octane ability on the offensive side, but they also had a goalie who had previously been called a choker also in the playoffs.
But
in Sergei Bobrovsky. So again, I'm not making a parallel. I'm saying that Bobrovsky at 35 finally went on the type of run that is necessary to lead a team to the promised land.
So, well, he did it 2 years in a row, and he had actually done that. That's why they went and got him, because he was that goalie before that.
No, he won one round in Columbus, and then he didn't even have the job. Yes, he played great down after he got the job back against Boston. He lost the job when the playoffs started the year previous, Sean.
And then went on a run in the playoffs.
Of course he did, but until that point, he had not been known as a playoff goalie. So anyways, I'm just saying that it can happen at different times for different people. Yeah. There's no guarantee it could happen for the Jets, but they've got a lot of pieces that a lot of teams would want, but they also have areas of improvement that are absolutely necessary, or else they can't go on a run of that magnitude. 16 games are hard to win, Sean. In the best year that we've seen from the Jets since 2011, they got 9 of the wins, right? 9 of them, when 16 are required. That's a long way away from raising the cup.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily love the comparison you're making between the Florida Panthers and the Winnipeg Jets, because while I agree with you, they became a defensive team. They became a defensive team at the same time the Jets went out to become a defensive team, and they went on to the cup. While the Jets were a defensive team for the first half of that year, and then had one of the most near epic collapses we've ever seen. It would have been the biggest collapse in NHL history had they fallen out of the playoffs that year. And then last year, again, the Winnipeg Jets are right there with them as a defensive team, but can't make the transition to the playoffs. I think for me, the difference is you saw a shift in philosophy for the Florida Panthers. And once they shifted that philosophy, their playoff success just went up and up and up. They had that same shift in defensive philosophy at the very same time as the Winnipeg Jets did. When Paul Maurice walked into Florida, Rick Bowness walked into Winnipeg, and both of them said, we're going to get defensive. Both of them have taken those teams in that direction. One has had playoff success, one hasn't. So I don't necessarily see the Jets style of play as the thing that turns things around. The question that I have with the Winnipeg Jets is why they keep breaking under pressure. When the rest of the
Sure.
league goes up, the Jets have crumbled. And that's the thing. I don't question them being a defensive team. It's why I think they're going to make the playoffs this year. The thing the Jets need to answer, that they needed to answer in 2019, that they needed to answer in 2023, that they needed to answer in 2024. Why, when the temperature goes up, are they crumbling? And so right now, Scott Arniel is saying they're trying to get this team to a place where they handle those kind of things better. And I go back to my initial comments. Paul Maurice was able to get the Florida Panthers to handle those things better in the playoffs. Rick Bowness was able to get the Dallas Stars to handle those things better in the playoffs. One took his team to the Stanley Cup final, another took his team to 2 Stanley Cup finals and won a Stanley Cup. Both those guys were unable to do that with the Winnipeg Jets. Arniel has a massive task at hand in able to pull that off. And I am completely and entirely in. I'll believe it when I see it. I do not see flashing neon signs that say things are different, things have changed for the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets, there's no more benefit of the doubt here. They need to show this year that they do not crumble under pressure. Otherwise, it just becomes a fabric of who they are, because right now it is a fabric of who they are. We should just, before we get out here, because I got to go watch my daughter play some volleyball here. Proud dad whose daughter made tier 1 here. Just give me an idea of what you think is going to happen this season, who's going where, and who do you think is going to end up in the Cup final?
Yeah, I've got Dallas and Vegas in the conference final, and in the East, I have the Rangers over somebody, and I like the Stars to win the Cup final. So, for those thinking that I have Kool-Aid, I have the Jets winning one round and then losing to the Dallas Stars in the second round.
Okay.
How about you? How about you?
I have the Jets losing again in the first round of the
Okay.
playoffs, although I think they put up a little bit more of a fight. I'm going with the Edmonton Oilers again. I went with them last year. I thought that they were going to pull it off towards the end there. I have a tendency, if you remember, of time and time again, when I kind of pick teams that I think are a little bit out there, I'll pick them the year before they succeed. So the first time I picked the Colorado Avalanche, I picked them the year before they finally went on to win. The Florida Panthers, I picked them the year before they went to the Cup final to go to the Cup final. I think I've got a pretty good tab on picking teams who are on the rise. But I think I just always arrive there a little bit too early. That's a long way of me saying last year I picked the the New Jersey Devils, and it was a disaster. It was a complete and total disaster. That said, new coaching, I think they've addressed some of their biggest needs, mainly in goal. I think this is one of those teams that when things fell apart, they're a young team and things kind of, spiraled. They didn't know how to handle it. They added a guy like Brendan Dillon. They added some pieces that are good at handling those things. I was going to, and Ken knows this, I was going to pick, because I'm a massive believer in Craig Berube, and I've thought to myself, if anyone can get the Toronto Maple Leafs over the hump, I think Craig Berube is a good pick. I was going to go in that direction. The only reason I go with the New Jersey Devils over the Toronto Maple Leafs is because of my tendency to pick teams a little bit early. Long way of saying I'm going with the exact same thing I went with last year. Edmonton Oilers in the final against the New Jersey Devils, and I have the Edmonton Oilers winning it, and Connor McDavid finally hoisting his first Stanley Cup. Ken, anything you got to say before we go?
Sorry, I just double checked. I had the Leafs as the other team in the Eastern Conference Final, so I have some belief in Craig Berube as well. My bold predictions, one in the East, one in the West, and Elliot Friedman can't say I stole them from him because I had my predictions on Saturday and their podcast came out on Monday. I have the Utah HC as the 8th and final seed in the West, and I have the Ottawa Senators as the team that finally gets in after knocking on the door a few times in the East as the surprises.
Wow, that's interesting. Just so people know, I've picked up a good chunk of the Ottawa Senators beat this year, which means I'll be doing and traveling for a lot of Ottawa Senators Hockey Night in Canada games. Still doing the Winnipeg Jets games, Hockey Night in Canada, and Wednesday night hockey. Monday night hockey, of course, has gone to Amazon. Will be interesting to see that crew coming into town and doing some Jets games. They do their first one later in the month when the Toronto Maple Leafs pay a visit to the Winnipeg Jets. One last thing before we go. I've talked so much and I don't know, maybe I talk too much about it, but have so much pride in our audience and what they do. And here's one of them. I've been promising this for a long time. It hasn't been it's a promise that we've been working on. You'll remember when we went back and we started selling things like the Sean's Headband t-shirt at the Kenny and Renny store at Sportsnet, the Wake Up mug that we were selling. A whole bunch of you really did us the honor of buying up a lot of this stuff. Every once in a while, I saw one again this summer, a Sean's Headband t-shirt out in the wild. Always good to see that kind of stuff. It meant so much to us that you supported us. At that time, I pledged to take whatever money I made off of the sale of Kenny and Renny merchandise, and I was going to donate it to the Winnipeg Humane Society. I was able to fulfill that promise today, ladies and gentlemen. Went down there, donated the money. This is a picture of me, Renny from Kenny and Renny, donating $817.95 to the Winnipeg Humane Society. That is me taking your generosity and your support and putting it to a place that I think does absolutely phenomenal work. Thank you for helping me do that. Thank you for allowing me to do that. You are the best KNR audience. So happy to have you back. Looking forward to the season. Excited for it. Thank you so much. We'll be looking forward to seeing you tomorrow as the Jets kick off the season against Rennie's pick for the Stanley Cup in the 2025 Stanley Cup. That would be the Edmonton Oilers. Can't wait to talk to you after that. See you later, everybody.